Brett Banfe back on with us today. It's a great day. We're going to go ahead and do this. This is Gavin, and we got my man Brett. We're going to do a little bit of a recap on 2024, looking backwards since we had the hackathon at the earlier part of the year, and also talk about some of the importance about the original Bitcoin protocol, the BSV blockchain, and some of the problems it solves, like Byzantine Generals Problem, how it actually does this, and some of these other protocols that may have cloned the system that may, some do it still and some don't, and the importance behind all this stuff, and just some updates. So Brett, good to see you. How you doing?
Hey, how you doing, Gavin? So great to be here. Hello to the audience.
Good
If
to
you're
see
out
you.
there watching, make sure you like, subscribe, and share Gavin's content.
Please,
Gavin, it's great to be on your show.
please do. Yeah, subscribe, like, comment, and let's do this, Brett. So yeah, we last time we had a kind of a year in recap here, which was you came out to the San Francisco Hackathon, which would have been in March, Scrypt, and it's been almost 9 months now since then. We're almost here at the end of the year. So in hindsight, where are things right now? Looking back at the last of the year in your mind, I mean, what would you say? What would you like to share and talk about to begin with? In
Yeah,
hindsight.
sure. I mean, maybe the first thing that comes to mind, that wonderful warm picture of everyone in San Francisco. First of all, it was a huge feat that went into putting that event into place. You were involved with organizing that. I met so many of your personal colleagues and your friends along the way. Just be due to the fact that it was being held in San Francisco, which is your stomping grounds. I also want to maybe comment on, just the beautiful hotel that we were at. I mean, it was like the top of Nob Hill. There's just, gorgeous architecture all around us. So close to Fisherman's Wharf. You can't help but be inspired. For me personally, I think back to that time, and I was lucky to be able to spend time out there with, members of the hand cash team, Alex Agut, and that's one of the fun things about Bitcoin, that, Alex, lives in Valencia, Spain, and, here he is all the way on the other side of the world in Fisherman's Wharf. We're sharing some Dungeness crab, and really what it comes down to is just, the entrepreneurial spirit that BSV enables, for people to take this paradigm shift, this technology shift that is enabling micropayments, data exchange, data services, getting the centralized players of that technology space out of the way, and really going back to, when you think of physical cash, you think of just a direct exchange of value between peer to peer. You're my contractor. I need a new addition on my home or something like that. I, take a look at the plans. We make a negotiation together. It's going to take this many man hours or whatever. And then I put some money in your pocket. You go about building, architecting the solution that's necessary for me. That's a direct exchange between us. What we've seen with the technical solutions that have crept up really since kind of the 50s, back when the original internet was envisioned as this peer-to-peer layer, what we found was that, it just doesn't work that way. In the same way, and it's not a bad thing that it doesn't work that way naturally. It's the exact same way as how an ant colony works. Okay, ant colonies, they're distributed, right? There's lots and lots of different ants, but they don't have the capacity to organize themselves. So what they need like a central figure. In the case of the ant colony, it's the queen ant, who marshals the forces of the ant colony and gets them to do what's the best for the entire ant colony, right? And so we still in some ways operate a little bit, even though we as human beings, I mean, we're so much more complex, we're more intelligent than ants. But the same deficiencies in our ability to organize with each other and to self-actualize and to create our own fates, our own destinies, to live into the futures as we wish to see them, to be the example of the change that we want to see in the world. The same problems that affect those ant colonies, that force them into this centralized model, those also exist in our world, despite us being, like multiple leaps of intelligence greater than these ants. And so what you see in my interpretation with Bitcoin, with the ability to congregate in San Francisco, to have everyone arm in arm with each other, and it wasn't just it wasn't just one group or another group, right? There was multiple different groups that have competing interests in this coopetition mindset where we're all forcing and challenging each other to get better, because any growth that we contribute to our small world network that we're building, that ends up benefiting all of us, because it creates a more dynamic structure for more businesses, for more artists, for more content creators, for more bloggers or more video content to come on board and actually monetize the base layer. And so you're transitioning out of this ant colony mindset into this self-actualization mindset, or some people might describe it as an abundance mindset. And there's a real technical backbone to that, and it has to do with exactly with what you talked about, the Byzantine Generals Problem.
Yes, the Byzantine Generals Problem. I mean, there we go. So I remember watching a video, an interview you did a couple years back with with an Australian guy, or he may have been a New Zealand guy, an investor. I can't remember his name now
Bruce
offhand.
Thompson.
Bruce Thompson, that's right. Yeah, Bruce Thompson, great show, and really, he was so super curious about trying to understand what exactly the value add is to, I guess, BSV blockchain over BTC or Ethereum as a proof of stake. And one of the things that you kept mentioning was, well, hey, this Byzantine Generals, it's solving this problem, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that, to be honest. And so, can you take me back to that and like why that's important and what it actually means? How it
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. So maybe we'll use the example that we were talking about before about exchanging physical cash with each other. You can imagine that in a situation where we're a tight fraternity, right? We all know each other. Maybe we all grew up in the same town. We all live on the same block, and we do business with each other. You grow strawberries, I grow blackberries. One of our friends has some hogs. And so we have this very tight, contained, self-regulating economy of value exchange between each other. You're always going to need my blackberries. I'm always going to need your strawberries, right? And we use cash to denote that, because I can't exactly put hogs in my pocket, right? So I need some sort of mechanism that I can use to represent value while we do these various different exchanges with each other. And then at different times of the year, you're going to have some different seasons for the produce that you have. So maybe in the fall, our friend that is growing pumpkins and squashes and all of these things, right, he's going to be flush with all kinds of stuff, and maybe the strawberries are out of season, and so you can't exactly exchange good for good, right? So we use money to as a common denominator for the exchange of all value. And then, really one of the key systems, one of the key things to think about when you're thinking about the Byzantine Generals Problem is the problem of how do we ensure that the cash itself, the money that we're using, has integrity. So maybe if we've always lived on the same block with each other, there's 5 of us, there's the strawberries, there's the blackberries, there's the hogs, and then there's 2 other guys. We all come, it's a trusted network at a certain point, right? We know that each other are good for it because we have 30 years of doing business with each other, right? But now let's just say that another guy comes and moves onto our block, and what does he do? Well, he doesn't have hogs, he doesn't have strawberries. He has this really, really powerful machinery that can reproduce any piece of paper. So we look at ourselves and go like, okay, crap, that's kind of a bad thing, right? Because these pieces of paper, this money that we're using, they're just pieces of paper. So, like all of a sudden we start doing business with him, and we think we're getting back the money that we exchanged him before, right? So it's still, we're hoping that it's within this circle of trust, but all of a sudden we really don't know. Is he actually spending money that was already in the economy, or is he inflating our economy economy by using this machine that he has to generate all of this additional cash, which gives him additional purchasing power. And the problem is that when he does that, it actually doesn't create any good into the market. So if he was like selling machines, or if he was selling nuts and bolts or screws that we needed as his neighbors, then we can at least say, okay, well, he's bringing a new good to the market, so all the other goods are going to have to offset each other. How many nuts and bolts is a hog worth? I don't know. We have to figure that out. But by selling nothing, really just by introducing this mechanism that basically balloons or distorts the global supply of the money, now we end up with this problem of how to trust. And so this is what the Byzantine Generals Problem essentially solves, which is that we're looking for honest signals. So as economic participants in the Bitcoin network, we are offloading the responsibility of maintaining and keeping that full data set, that full ledger of the complete, spendable Bitcoins. We're offloading that to service entities that specialize in that. In the same way that when we're doing our accounting or something like that at the end of the year, a lot of times we're offloading the bookkeeping to professional services that specialize in that, right? And this is one of the things that market efficiencies allows you to do, is allows you to get really good at a specific skill and then offer that skill to the rest of the market. In the case of keeping track of the global supply of the money and making sure that there's not someone with a special machine that's introducing new money to the system unbeknownst to all of the participants. Now, number one, it makes sense that would be a economically incentivized service that's being provided, right? Because it requires all types of specialized hardware. It requires all types of, connectivity and all of these things. So what you end up happening, just as Satoshi talked about in, his introducing people to the Bitcoin and through the forums, he was saying that, eventually what happens is this process of keeping the UTXO set and managing, the global state of spendable outputs, that gets moved to specialized server farms that have, that specialize in that capacity. But so and just like in a Mexican standoff, you have, okay, so we have 8 to 10 entities that are keeping track of the global money supply, right? But in a way, they're all holding each other accountable, right? So just like our old story of one guy has the strawberries, one guy has the blackberries, one guy has the hogs, etc., right? Except instead of it being on a local level where we're exchanging actual physical goods, it's on like a global level where instead of it being strawberries and blackberries and hogs, it's different entities that are competing to extend the honest chain. And just like we used to have the problem of the new guy that arrives on the block and suddenly he has a machine that we've never heard of before that enables him to reproduce any piece of paper or any piece of data, there's always the worry that as these economic participants are vested in the health and the growth of the Bitcoin network, that a new participant will come along and he'll just try to distort that. Right. So how do they make sure that it's just like in any economic system, you don't want to exclude people. Right. So you don't want to say, oh, well, this guy hasn't been on the Bitcoin network for 15 years like I have. So therefore, his opinion is not valid or not good. Right. Because ultimately, when you do that, you're excluding people that have the merit to participate based on some perceived slight. So you say oh, I would never allow someone to educate my child if they didn't have a PhD, because PhDs are hard to get and smart people have PhDs. So if you don't have one, then you must be dumb or something like that, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to allow anyone to participate if they have the merit to actually include and introduce value to the system, right? Because, just like Elon Musk, I don't necessarily may not think it's that interesting or valuable to go to Mars, but he does. He should be allowed to put his money where his mouth is and move us closer to this. And maybe in 10, 15 years, I say, you know what? I'm really glad we didn't listen to me because, we're causing a lot of problems on Earth, and now we've set the stage for a big, opportunity to be multi-planetary. Thank you very much, Elon. If we hadn't allowed him to put his money where his mouth is, then and we tried to ostracize him, then we as a global humanity wouldn't be able to benefit from the foresight that he had. Well, the exact same way with the Bitcoin network. We want people to contribute and to participate, but when they participate, we have to be sure that they're not sending us false information, because they're always, going to try and trip us up, right? This is an economic battle. And so that sets the stage a little bit for what the Byzantine Generals Problem actually is. And I can get into that, but
where does it come from? Was it an army or military term?
Yeah, so the basic way that you can think about the Byzantine Generals Problem is it is a metaphor. It's not really an army term. It is a computer science problem that uses the metaphor of armies to establish the problem. And up until Bitcoin, there was no solution. So they didn't ever establish a problem and a solution. They just established the problem. They said, we recognize that there's no solution to this. And it came Bitcoin. It took Bitcoin to come along and solve it. But let me just explain what the problem is. So the problem is, let's think for a second that there's a city under siege. Okay. And let's just say that this city is Byzantine. That's where it gets the name from. So Byzantine is the city. It's under siege, right? And it's surrounded by multiple armies. So we can think of these surrounding armies as being, like a circle. Okay. And so, and it's literally, think of it as 5 different segmented army groups. Okay. So it forms like a pentagon, right? And,
so 5 different armies around the circle.
5 different armies around the city.
I see, and they're trying to siege the city.
They're trying to siege the city. Okay, and then the city has defenses that are on the inside. So let's just say, let's paint a scenario for you where 4 armies. The 4 armies remain on the border of the city, and 1 army storms the city. Okay, so that army would fail because the city is powerful enough to beat 1 army. It's also powerful enough to beat 2 armies. Okay, so if 3 stay on the side and 2 storm the city, the 2 will lose because of the fact that there's, just like any city, there's you get an advantage when you hold it. Right. So that's like the advantage of holding a barracks. You get to look down from the top of the wall and shoot down. Right. So even if you in the city, you only have the equivalent of 2 armies worth of men, your 2 armies can beat their 2 armies because you have the benefit of being actually in the city. So what it means is that for there to be a successful siege of the city, at least 3 armies need to participate in the siege, because the 3 will always be able to beat the 2, even if the 2 have the additional benefit of the walls, etc. The wall is only like the minutest tiebreaker, right? So as long as it's like 50.00001 or whatever, then the wall will always tiebreak to the city. So this is actually a metaphor. If we think about it, it's, we use the example of 3 and 2 because it's very easy to visualize, that there's 5 armies, there's 3 over here, there's 2 over here, or whatever. But in reality, this is the same exact argument as the 51% attack, because you just need to attack the city with greater than 51% of the army power. And if you can do that, then you can basically successfully broadcast the exchange, which, the city falls to the new holders of the 51%. And so the problem that really is being established here is that along the edges of the battle, again, you can imagine them being in sets of groups of 5. So there's 1 at the top, there's 2 that flank, and then there's 2 at the bottom, right? They can't communicate with each other. Because if they were to communicate with each other, then effectively, how would they do that? They would maybe send a message, but when the message leaves one of these flankers from the bottom of the city, heading towards ideally, towards maybe the top of the city, that message could get captured along the way by, by rogue participants or by the city itself, right? So they could be sending a message, hey, we want you to attack at 3 p.m., but it gets intercepted. Maybe 3 p.m. is the real time that they all intend to attack, but it gets intercepted. And what they do is they send a 1 p.m. to one part of the army. They send a 4 p.m. to another part, a 2 p.m. to another part. So what ends up happening is that it's the inability to have a trusted communication channel and be distributed, because the other thing that they can't do is they can't take all of their armies down and only attack from the south base, right? Because if they do that, then they lose the benefit of attacking from multiple angles. And actually, it's the multiple angles that give them the ability to upset the city. If they attack from only one direction, then the wall will always win. So again, this is a metaphor that it's explaining a computer problem, and the computer problem it's explaining is a problem that's basically about how to form distributed consensus. So how do we get operatives that are in different locations and that necessarily have different perspectives to agree on the same sets of information? And the example that I always use is, witnessing a horse race or something like that. If you've ever been to the Kentucky Derby, there's going to be people that are sitting all the way on this side of the stands and other people that are sitting all the way on this side of the stands, right? And, we need to get them to agree to who won the Kentucky Derby. But when it's like, when the margin for error is like the hair on a horse's nose, how are these two people that are on totally different sides of the race going to be able to agree which horse crossed the finish line first? They don't have the same perspective. They can't evaluate each other's information because the information can always get subverted and co-opted on the way. And so the solution to this problem is, and I go back to, again, the problem of the generals, is the problem of demonstrating a loss of a loss of a valuable resource. Okay, so
handicap
yeah, this is the
principle.
handicap principle. Exactly. Yeah, and that solves it. We can get into exactly why it solves it, but it solves it not only on a technical level
before
but a
Bitcoin,
biological level.
Nobody thought about that. Nobody could figure that out, right? You're saying.
In a way. So
people had talked about it, but they never could kind of put that. That was like one piece of the puzzle that wasn't added, which is the handicap principle. Is that the piece, or is it the proof of work, or is that what proof of work is?
Exactly. No, you're 100%. Everything that you just said, all in a neat little bow. I mean, it's all of those things. So yes, it was known and it was understood to be a reliable way to evaluate the honesty and the integrity of information. But it's also one of those things that sometimes we learn things from our grandmothers, Gavin, and they never get taught into an academic book. So our grandmothers knew about proof of work, you see someone that is laboring, right? And that is virtuous, that is out there making a difference in the world. They're applying their sweat equity, right? They're building railroads, they're doing all this stuff. And another person that is just doing nothing, right? Not demonstrating any work, etc., right? And then let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that you're a caretaker of your child or something like this. You have a single daughter that lives, but we're talking about the 1800s or whatever, and disease is ridden all through the world, right? And you're sick with some malaria or something like that, and you need to send your daughter to one of those men to be their new caretaker because you're about to die or something like this. Who are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the guy that's doing nothing, that's just laying down all day long? And maybe he has some great ideas, right? Maybe he talks about how the world should be so much more different than it actually is, and maybe all of those ideas make sense, right? But he's not doing anything about it. Whereas the other guy, he may not have all these great ideas about what's wrong with the world, but what he does is he goes out there and he applies himself. And I know, for me personally, I would want to send my daughter to go be taken care of by the person who's out there building something and making a virtue of the life. And maybe it's not the perfect life, but when you apply yourself, like a lot of times God gives you enough. If you make the effort to go out there and actually and put that will into being. Whereas if you sit there and do nothing, you could sit there and do nothing for the next 30 years. And yeah, the world's not going to be great 30 years from now, but you also didn't have anything to show for it at the end.
Dude, action will always solve the problem of fear. Every time there's fear, take action. Every time there's inability, there's insecurity, action always solves that. Because even if it's not the right action, it will start moving the progress forward, and then it will correct itself. The right action will come as long as there's progress and action.
Absolutely. And so it's the exact same model. What we're talking about here with proof of work is just that it's poetry in motion. It's the economics of taking action and making a visible demonstration of your certainty, and maybe you end up being wrong. Maybe you think that that the best time to attack is 4 p.m. or something like this, but maybe secretly the best time is actually 2 p.m., right? But what you do is you put your money where your mouth is. You go out there and say, you know what? You guys are free to decide whatever you want to do. I'm sending my forces in at 4 p.m. and I'm gonna lay my life on the line. Now, here's the problem though, is the other generals can watch you make that assertion and say that you're going to lay your life on the line and that you stand for the values that you're espousing, etc., right? But also a liar could say all of those things, right? I could say, hey, Gavin, tomorrow morning, I'm going to go here. I'm going to put everything I have. I'm going to sign up for the army. I'm going to put all my values on the line, and I want you to do it with me. And then you show up to do everything that I just said I was going to do. And then here it is. I backed out. I tricked you into going and taking an action by saying that my actions would match my values when actually they didn't. So we need this way to sniff out, okay, they're saying they're going to do it, but just saying is not enough, right? Because you can use that mechanism to convince other people and use that as a means to control their actions. So it's what they say, you always look for do not as I say, but watch what I do, right? These are old
actions speak louder than words, man.
Yeah, actions speak louder than words. I mean, this is proof of work. This is the solution to this technical computer problem, which, yes, on one hand, it does represent an actual problem with computer systems. But on the other hand, this is a problem that is as old as time itself, right? Because we have to learn, hey, how do I do business with this guy? This guy just moved in down the street. I don't know. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he going to be someone that I even want in my neighborhood? You know what I mean? You have to find, and it's not by people's words, it's by their actions that demonstrate their values. And that's exactly what happens on the Bitcoin network. You take the actions of the Bitcoin network's participants and you use those actions to coordinate the rest of the network, right? And it uses very simple checksums. So the nice part about computer systems is that you can validate information very quickly. So very quickly, if you tell me 2 + 2 is 4, or excuse me, if you tell me that 2 + 2 is 5, I can really quickly check if you're telling the truth or not, but if you tell me that, the 179 millionth digit of pi is the number 4, I mean, I can't check that. I don't know. I'd have to do the work to figure out if you're telling me the truth or not. Once you present me the truth, I can verify it very easily using a computer system. So all this does, what this means is that it takes the values of actually do as I say, not as I do, and the gumption of hard work and how hard work actually produces results. Even if you end up doing hard work in the wrong direction, somehow even the value and benefit of hard work itself is so good that you can apply it in the wrong way by mistake or by accident and still get benefit out of it because it's so important and it's so valuable. Now, if you're smart, you will correct yourself. You'll figure out eventually, I'm doing it the wrong way. I need to adjust how I do it to maximize results. But all we're talking about doing with proof of work is just applying that at a computer level.
Yeah. So all at a computer level. So that's what sets Bitcoin aside. Now it sounds like other protocols are doing it too. Because so back in a little bit of a history side, so you had the original Bitcoin protocol, and then the MIT license, it allowed other people to copy it, like Litecoin, Digibyte, and others, and I think Doge, and even I think Zcash. A lot of these people started copying it, right? And they did these and that was okay, right? That's all okay. They were doing it, and they were changing it, they were making their things. But then they had the other. Apparently, was it a copy when they created what do they call it? SegWit. Was that actually a copy? Because I heard on Wikipedia, which is usually fake news, but on the Wikipedia they said it was a hard fork, and I'm not even sure if that's true. You know, I've heard now otherwise. It's actually a copy of the blockchain when they put SegWit. It was copy of the original. Do you know?
Yes and no. So it would be a update to the protocol. So this is what it fundamentally, the introduction of SegWit, the reassignment of what the definition of a Bitcoin. So in the Bitcoin white paper, Bitcoin is defined as a chain of digital signatures, and SegWit comes along and breaks that system. It just says like, well, we're no longer considering a Bitcoin to be that. What we're considering Bitcoin is this new segregated witness structure. And so the transaction used to be included and hashed as part of the new Bitcoin, and it no longer is. And that is a fundamental upgrade to the rule set. So I'm trying to think of an example that we could use to
So
explain
they
this.
so basically they took the network and then they copied it, and then did they copy the network, and then on the new network they did this, they segregated the digital signatures, or and the other network continued on like the original network, or I mean, ticker aside, forget the ticker, forget the names. I'm just like, on the actual face of the blockchain, was it copied where now, oh, look, there's two blockchains now? A copy
Uh,
was made.
yes and no. In a way, it's copied, and it works a little bit like the mouth of a river. Okay, so you have the source of the river, which is oftentimes the mountain peak or something like that, right? Where you have the snow melt that comes down and it forms the actual mount or the source of the river. And then as the river comes down, different portions of it split off. So, like if we just think of for example of, the Colorado River or something like that, or
Yeah.
at a certain point, the Colorado River continues down a certain path, and it's
Yeah.
understood to be the Colorado River. But there is a slight divergence, right? And that's a smaller river that shoots off the Colorado River. Now it's still fed from the same source, but it's understood not to be the Colorado River. So
Yeah.
if you look at these two different points on the river, right, you don't. In some ways, you could say that the river is being copied, but it's not actually being copied. It's being forked, right? It's one river that's being forked into two different directions. And so in the case of BSV, BSV is the continuation of the river as the river was originally, decided that its original rules would be processed. So Bitcoins are still continued to be considered chains of digital signatures. Bitcoin scripting language still operates and functions. All of these things that in the up until the year 2015, when you thought of Bitcoin, you thought of cheap, instant, peer-to-peer, irreversible, non-trusted, third party, no intermediary. All of these things that we think of as Bitcoin, those continue on today as simply BSV. Now, these other forks, originally it was BTC, and then that forked off on its own, and then again, you wouldn't say that it necessarily copied the river, but it does represent another path that the river ended up taking. Now it follows totally other rule sets, right? It says, I know that in this river, water flows, it finds the fastest path downhill, and it finds the path of least resistance. Well, in our world, water can fly, and it can do all this, right? It comes up with all these crazy rules, and it just wants people to believe that's still the same river, when anybody that's actually out in the field would say, that's not the same river. That's an abstraction. And
Is Is
it
that similar to
relate.
what like Litecoin did? Did Litecoin do the same thing?
No, Litecoin would be the equivalent is if we use the same metaphor of a tributary source or a, like the mountaintop or something like that, where the Bitcoin river begins at the snowmelt on the mountaintop. What Litecoin says is just like, okay, if Bitcoin began on Mount Everest, right? It's the mountain of all mountains, right? We're just going to say, you know what? Let's just put Bitcoin's rules in place, but let's start it on that little itty bitty hill over there called Litecoin, right? So they have their same rules, or they're not the same rules, excuse me. They're slightly different rules, but like, for the most part, there's a lot of similarity between the rules of Litecoin and the rules of Bitcoin, right? It still uses proof of work, it still publishes block headers, it still has nodes checking transactions, and anyway, but the difference is that it's just beginning on another mountain. So the water that's feeding the Bitcoin river, right? It's not messing at all with the Litecoin river. The Litecoin's its own
Got it.
separate thing. But only thing is that Litecoin was wise and said, hey, look, those guys over there on that mountain, they started a pretty dang good river with this technology. Let's just do the same thing. We'll just do it on this little tiny molehill that we found over here called Litecoin.
Okay. Okay. So that's the difference. So it is actually a fork with these other networks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So, all right. That helps to clarify that, dude. So really, really appreciate it. So what is, I mean, there's this, I don't know, dude, this is really, it may be an inappropriate topic, but if you can't answer it, that's fine. But Bank of International Settlements just published an article, and somebody's been sharing it with me, talk about the space today. And it looks like everything they're writing about in their, this is like the central bank of the central banks. These are the big guys, the whales of central banks. Okay. And they control all the banks. They wrote this big article and they got this thing about how they're doing all this distributed consensus. It looks like simplified payment verifications. And we were reading it today on the space, and it sure looks very similar. And they even mentioned SHA-256 mining algorithms and all these things. Then they mentioned Ethereum blockchain, and so it's like, what's going on with these people, man? Are they working with the BSV blockchain? Do you know? In the background, what's going on?
I don't have any knowledge about that. I wish I did. But one thing I will say is that, these are small circles of the people that are even considering these problems. Okay. I want to take a second to just talk because I always like to talk on your show about just the global state of the world that we're in. We're in some really strange times, okay? Information can't be trusted. We're as divisive as ever as a society, as a globe. Potentially, some of the people that are in positions of power to do the most good in the world, they end up becoming vessels for doing just terrible things that subvert democracy, that revoke free speech. We and yet and here's America standing. I want to just go back for a second and talk about Dwight D. Eisenhower, where when Dwight D. Eisenhower left office right before John F. Kennedy assumed the presidency, he made a bold call to not just the American people, but the rest of the world and said, hey, guys, really need you to be paying attention right now, okay? There is this thing called the military industrial complex, and these are people that are no one to mess with. If they and left unchecked, these are institutions that have no capacity to self-regulate themselves. In the exact same way as an alcoholic, imagine locking an alcoholic in a liquor store, you know what I mean? Like, they're not going to have any capacity to regulate themselves. They're just going to do damage to themselves to the point that eventually they'll kill themselves. Okay, so this is what happens when the military industrial complex just runs completely rampant with whatever it wants to do in the world. It just creates a completely, topsy-turvy world where building, foundational elements necessary to grow a healthy society are subverted from the bottom up, right? Through covert means. And as a result, what ends up happening is we turn to a government agency or something like that for help, because we go, you know what, this world is just so scary, it's so frustrating, it's so hard for us to find commonality with our neighbor, to as Jesus said, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, right? It's too difficult because I'm just too filled with anger and animosity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around and I'm going to become prostrate to the, please, centralized agencies, solve all of our problems for us, right? That's exactly where they want us to be. And so these systems like distributed consensus, like the river that we were talking about, right? Our ability to demonstrate by actions, not just by words, right? These are the mechanisms that we use to rebuild this small world network of value exchange with each other. And and so, the reason why I'm talking about this is because, you have to understand the mindset of like these entities that are looking to solve problems like payments. On the one hand, there's the global good that it represents for humanity. And we want secure data. We want, the ability to exchange value, right? We understand the value of capitalism in structuring a free society, and the ability to put your money where your mouth is, to be entrepreneurial. We know and understand the value of all of these things, but also there is a massive amount of capture of, agencies and economic interests and nepotism, and captured regulatory agencies and captured,
They call it the deep state.
agencies.
Yeah.
And what?
They call it the deep state.
Exactly. Yeah, we're talking about, and it's a state that will further and further and further insulate itself and make its presence less and less and less known. Just like the mafia, back in the day, the mafia used to just kill people in broad daylight, right? They would be like, "Yeah, you mess with me, like, yeah, I'm just gonna shoot you right out front of my restaurant," And then all of a sudden they realize, okay, you know what? If we can still like intimidate people and stuff like that, but like, it's not like the 70s where you can just put bullets in people's heads or put bombs in their cars anymore, right? You have to get more and more covert in terms of the way in which you
Yeah.
impose
People
your
got iPhones
your
now, man. They'll
will.
put you on film. They'll put it on blast. There he is.
Exactly. And so what you have is these institutions they always say that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, right? So we have these tools of the deep state, but the deep state's not going to do an analysis of itself and go, hey, we figured out that we shouldn't really exist, guys, because we're kind of a danger to democracy itself. They're never going to decide that, even if that's the truth. In the same way that an alcoholic is never going to put the bottle down, he needs some sort of intervention, right? So, we're seeing the emergence of distributed systems and this new technology, and we're seeing AI come along. And really, it's, just like Elon Musk talks about, we're moving away from the centralized legacy media infrastructure, and we're finding valuable, bold voices, Gavin, like yourself, who are stepping forward and doing exactly what Elon's saying. You are the media now. The media is not interviewing people about these very important subjects and delving in so that you can understand the intricacies and the nuances of them. That's being left to you because they just absconded. They abscond from their responsibility to be informants of the public anymore, because what they've become is informants of the narrative, the pre-approved narrative. So the reason why I'm bringing all that up in response to your question about the Bank of International Settlements is just to say, like, look, do I know of any negotiations or discussions that are in place around that specifically? No, I definitely do not. But would I be surprised if they were taking a real hard, close look at the technology? And I would say no, because I wouldn't be surprised. I would be, in fact, it would be, it would make a lot of sense to me, because we're talking about very small circles of people that actually understand this stuff. Even the people within the blockchain community that constantly advocate for disasters like Lightning Network and BTC small blocks and small block Raspberry Pis and Luke Dash Jr.'s cat farm, etc. They are like, they have no idea what Bitcoin is. You can tell as soon as you get into a conversation with them. They have literally no clue. To them, it's just some abstract layer. It's a glorified Google Doc.
I had a space with G Money, who's with the Devolution Group. Anyways, what media channel? Anyways, he's a respected guy. He was on a space. I don't know the other day with me, and it was really helpful because he made the point, and he, it's funny. He's on the space, right? And all these people are listening, right? It's kind of a funny space. Here he is. He's talking. He sounds great, man. All these BSV people were listening, right? And he's like, "Oh, this is it." He's talking about Bitcoin, and they're just like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And then he says that, one minute he starts talking about BTC, and he's talking about how all we need is 1 megabyte blocks. It's just per, and then people just start freaking out. They're like, "What is going on?" But he says that this is right. This is the way to go forward because that's what the market's decided. And what matters is what the market's decided. And Michael Saylor and these people are making the market. It's been decided. Move on. You guys need to drop this other BSV and these other things. He said they're a speckle on an elephant's back. He's like, it's just sorry, you guys. And he says, I hope all you guys on the call here have BTC because you're going to miss out, he said. And he was pretty convincing. So what do you have to say about that, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, well, number one, I love it. I love that people have conflicting perspectives on this because it's what one of the benefits that we have as a society, right, is that we get to put our money where our mouth is. So he's putting his money where his mouth is, and also it sounds like he's being sincere, right? He's saying, "Hey, I wish that that you guys all had some of this," right? And in one respect, he is, a lot of times these people they're making a value judgment based on fiat value. So they're just saying, okay, well, I really couldn't care less to get really deep down into the technical specifics about which is better or why. What I do know is that the market agrees with me and that they think that this one is more valuable. But, the problem that I have with that is like, again, if we go back and we imagine a scenario where instead of we're talking about Bitcoin, let's say that we're talking about doctorate degrees or something like that, right? In a medical profession. Okay. And we know for a fact that there's this group of people, Luke Dash Jr. and Samson Mal and, Blockstream
What about
and
Maxwell?
Adam
He's
Back.
Gregory,
And
famous
they're the
Gregory
only ones that
Maxwell.
are allowed to print degrees, okay? And they start handing out their degrees to their buddies and go, okay, you're a doctor of medicine, you're a doctor of medicine, you're a doctor of medicine. And then this other guy I see, he's actually the one that's, none of these people that are getting degrees, they've never seen, they've never taken a scalpel to anybody, they've never done surgery, they don't know the difference between a limbic system and a nervous system, right? They don't know any of this, right? All they know is that they're getting told by the establishment that they have achieved something. What that is that they achieved, they have no idea. They just know that it's there. It's the equivalent of a degree, just like a piece of paper can be a degree if someone smart enough says that it is, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't actually mean that they know anything about the human body. Whereas if I need to have surgery, if I need surgery on my heart, I'm not going to just get it from the guy that some knucklehead gave a degree to just because he's his buddy, he lives next door to him or something like that. I want to know, hey, what do you know about the human body? How much actual work have you done to get in there and look at this, right? And if someone can demonstrate that they understand the metrics, why the human body system works like that, what a pump vacuum is within the human heart, etc., right? Like all of this stuff, they don't need a degree at that point, right? Because it's the demonstration of the proof of work that is signal enough about whether or not they're competent enough to take it in the right direction. And the last thing I'll say on that is just when we use the fiat value of an asset class to determine what its value actually is, then that's when you run into things like the Lehman Brothers case back in 2007, late 2007, early 2008, and into 2009, where basically all of these, collateralized debt obligations and, credit default swaps and over leveraging of basically an informational structure that no one understood. And again, going back to the captured regulatory agencies, you have agencies like Moody's or whatever that are applying AAA ratings to these subprime mortgage bundles, et cetera, that no one's actually investigating. There's a whole movie about it. If you have time, you
Big
can go
Short,
check
right?
out Big Short. Yep.
Yeah.
So someone actually took the time to go in there and say it's the exact same thing as someone took the time to listen and look at the arguments for Bitcoin. And they say, whoa, 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 hold on. All of these people, yes, it's trading for 95,000, 94,000. It's almost at 100K, right? Yes, it's trading at this, but it's a bunch of knuckleheads that are all trading with each other that have no idea of the underlying fundamental value, that they don't realize how over leveraged these subprime mortgages are, right? Someone that actually has the intellectual capacity to go in there to audit those processes and those systems, which does require some technical knowledge, technical know-how, and that's exactly what the argument for the Byzantine Generals Problem demonstrates. Then you're actually able to go in there and say, okay, maybe as a hobby project, the idea of a segregated witness coin as an alt chain or something like that, that's really cool. Well done. Hey, Luke Dash Jr., pat yourself on the back and go buy a couple cats at the local grocery store. Good for you, but it's not Bitcoin.
No, it's not. It's not Bitcoin. Exactly. And so refrain from calling it that. And ultimately that leads us over to the passing off case right now, because it's going to come out in the media sooner or later. This passing off case, I think, if nothing else, it's going to get some attention. And now that it's before the high court, and there's going to be a response soon. So right now they still don't have jurisdiction over anybody. Apparently, the case has been filed. It's still like waiting for jurisdiction, meaning everybody gets served, and then Gregory Maxwell and Luke and all these people can come to court. And this is a really key point about this case that I found out. See, all these people who started in Bitcoin Core, what they did was they actually were, there's something called a common law limited partnership, just a common law partnership. And it's a legal term. And if you have a common law partnership, you actually have personal responsibility. So you are not allowed to hide behind, let's say in California, you could go and form up an LLC or a corporation or an S Corp or C Corp, and you actually, it'll limit your liability when you do wrongdoing. So you don't get sued personally and, they go out and take everything you own. But in a common law partnership like BTC Core, for example, it actually, the core developers become personally on the hook. Somebody didn't tell them this. I think when they signed up on that, whenever they signed up for Blockstream or whoever, when they did the blood signature saying, sign your soul here, when they did that, they forgot to tell them that this is actually doesn't shield your liability, guys. There might be a day where Satoshi or somebody could come forward and say, hey, wait a second, you're using the name Bitcoin and you shouldn't be using that name. And here you are using it. I want it back, And now here we are. So this is now at this interesting time right now. I think last time we talked about the Royal Fork. We talked about it last time.
That's right.
It wasn't that long ago. And we had the Royal Fork conversation where now the court said that Craig's not Satoshi. He's got his appeal going. We don't know what's going to happen with that yet. But if as of now they said he's not Satoshi, so therefore he's coming forward, and now BTC Core, they can't use the defense of they're promissory stopped from saying, well, Satoshi didn't say all those things, and because it was Craig Wright, he wasn't him. Well. It totally, the argument shifts now because Craig's saying, well, I relied on Satoshi. So they can't say, well, you were. Oh, you see, it blocks the whole situation right there. It's like their defense would be, well, you're not Satoshi. And he's like, yeah, exactly. I relied on Satoshi though. That was the thing. And he promised that he would build the protocol like this. And I build all my businesses around this. Exactly. And now look at what happened. I've been damaged and harmed. Dude, that's happening right now. It's very exciting time right now with this case. And anyways, yeah. What are your thoughts on all that with the latest and greatest with this passing off situation?
Well, you've done a great job of covering it all the way from the very beginning. The subtle nuances of this. I hate to use this example, but it's one of the first court cases I can think of or something, which is like the O.J. Simpson trial, remember? And like suddenly, like everyone in the universe suddenly became an expert on Ford white Broncos and, gloves and, like it just sinks into your head, and suddenly you become, like you never thought you were going to become an expert on the Byzantine Generals Problem and the way in which promissory estoppel relates with distributed software release, etc. But what ends up happening is that there's so much intrigue around the concept of Satoshi, around the launch of Bitcoin. Even for me, someone that really understands this at a deep level and, has spent a lot of my life studying it, etc. The amount that I don't understand, you could just about fit in the Grand Canyon. You know what I mean? This is like, and I have a drop in the bucket. And I think there's still shoes to fall in terms, I mean, I know there's still shoes to fall in terms of all of the ins and outs and the he saids and she saids and why this and why that, etc. And what we do in this process is that we come to better understanding of our obligations to our fellow man and to each other. Because when we're forced, like a lot of times you don't think about the legal implications of something, right? Like,
Yeah.
like
You just sign up for Bitcoin Core. You get a little money, and hey, just change
yeah.
this bit. What's the big deal?
Yeah, you're
Who
just going
cares?
about your normal daily
Yeah.
life. I mean, laws in the back of your mind, like, hey,
Eh.
like don't
But this is decentralized. This is permissionless.
exactly,
Yeah.
does that change it, or is it just, and so one thing that maybe I would draw people's attention to, and I don't know if you've gotten a chance to check this one out, but if not, definitely spend some time on this one. So there is a paper that was released by the Law Commission in the UK. And the Law Commission has been around, I believe, since the 60s. And what they do is they are a private body of former, former barristers, former high officials in, public service, etc., former lords, etc. And but they're no longer acting in their capacity as, magistrates or whatever, right? So they have effectively like retired, but in their capacity as being retired, they also fully understand the law because it was at one point their actual profession. And then what they do is they do advisements in this law commission, and so they analyze technological developments and advances to determine whether new laws need to be formed. So an example of that would be, we used to not have airplanes, right? And so all of our laws pertain to, like, hey, if you're driving around and this happens, then this is the penalty, right? So suddenly they said, okay, well now the concept of driving around, like, how does that apply to flying around? We're doing something different. It's similar. We're still in a vehicle that's like maneuvering, right? Someone's still operating it, but we have to get a determination. And so you don't want to just like poll random people on the street, like, hey, what do you think the difference between driving and flying is, right? You want a professional that actually has the capability to do that due diligence and understands the full loops and, red tape of all the legal processes so that they make an advisement on whether or not laws do or don't need to be updated. So this law commission, they recently published I believe 300-page report, but it could be, I could be ways off on that number, but I do remember the name of the paper. It was called Digital Assets, a final report. And it was a 5-year long term that they took to investigate this. Again, when you're talking about, International Bank of Settlements and are they involved in, specking out or sandboxing certain technologies? It's like, well, I know for a fact that this law commission did a 5-year long report. I mean, you have to study everything. It's not just like, like you're going on Twitter for a couple of days and you're saying, all right, this is I figured out XRP
I watched a
a
couple
scam.
YouTube videos. I'm good.
Yeah, I watched a couple YouTube videos. No, this is a 5-year report where it's being commissioned and financed by the government. And I think if you look at that report, Dr. Wright's his cases were cited 69 times, each of them favorably, if I remember correctly, but they didn't specifically mention Dr. Wright. I believe that they just referred to the cases as Tulip, because that's what a lot of the defendants or the
Are we talking about right climbing? One of the right
No,
ones.
no, this would be COPA cases and things like
Copa
that.
case. Okay.
Yeah, COPA cases. And so again, these are private bodies, they're private barristers, magistrates, right? They, like, so this is just their opinion, right? But it is a professional opinion, but it's also an opinion that was published as part of an advisory to the UK government on how digital assets should be treated. What types of laws exist and should be recommended for their management and to ensure that basically we don't want to thwart them. We don't want to kill the innovation that it represents, and too much regulation might do that. But we also don't want to just say, hey, willy nilly, like let's just throw three sheets to the wind and see what
I
happens, right?
see.
Because we can see that it can be the foundation of an emergent network of money laundering, trafficking, and all of these things that we're trying so hard to stamp out in other legacy financial systems, let alone now we have to find these other new financial systems. And when those can exist in parallel, when you can move between these various different networks at will and very much minimize the amount of oversight that's happening along those pathways, then basically you are inviting illicit activity, because illicit activity is always going to find, just like water finds a path of least resistance, so does illicit activity. And so if you create a fertile ground for that, it's naturally going to start to take it over. So Dr. Wright, specifically his tulip cases, were cited in that paper, Digital Assets, a Final Report, positively some 69 times in a 300-page report. And specifically, they said the words, and I'm going from memory, so if I got it wrong in the comments, let me know. But specifically, they said things like, to the effect of, if Dr. Wright had never advanced these cases, our understanding of how applicable law applies to these situations would be decades behind where it is today, because of the importance of the points that he's raising and he's testing in, like he always talks about, in an official environment where it's not, a social consensus or something like that on a social post or something, but this is has the full weight and prejudice of law behind
Yeah,
it.
and it's really exciting because I know that this is not a popular opinion at all, but I personally love the idea that he's out there representing himself now on this passing off case, and it's probably going to be rough around the edges. It's probably going to be not perfectly done. And normally when you have attorneys or barristers, they're much more polished. And he is an attorney and a barrister, but he's also got disabilities too. So it's not going to be the perfect way, but it's exciting to see him represent himself and do everything he can on his own to bring this forward and not be limited in any way. I felt like a lot of times he may have been silenced or censored. I know his attorneys had, that one video where he came in and he signed on the Bitcoin. He put forward his passport and he was signing on the website about the Satoshi website. Remember that, where he did that,
Yep.
and his passport. And then they didn't bring that into the courtroom, or they brought it into the courtroom, but it wasn't allowed, objections or whatnot, it didn't get in and it wasn't significant apparently. So, it's just things like that I'm excited to see how he plays, how he uses these things on his own, gets things
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, and I one time heard him described by a close friend of both of ours, I think, Alex Falvel, Two Hop Ventures. If you are interested in checking out his projects, dark to light .xyz. That's another. It's dark the number two light .xyz. But he described him as the greatest genius of our times, and he said he's the greatest genius since Alan Turing, who invented the modern computer. So of course, yeah, you're gonna get a very peculiar, very not peculiar, but a very particular person, right? But you, in some ways, have to be an extremely particular person to build the systems, to be the certified expert in security practices that he is. And for everything that he is, I understand that he has Asperger's and that he, can be distant, I guess is a good way to explain it. At least like on a social or emotional level, maybe he has some distance there. But my experience of him has always been just that he is a genuinely warm human being, that he cares tremendously about the ideals that he holds highest, that he isn't cavalier about his determinations of the value, those value systems or those value structures. He puts a lot of thought into testing. It's almost like in the way that if you remember the stories of Nikola Tesla, where Tesla was supposedly at his peak as an inventor, he was so proficient at the capacity to fully formulate an idea in his head that by the time he built a prototype of his idea, it worked perfectly. You know, like other inventors probably they don't have the benefit of being able to run the tests conceptually. You know, they have to build it in practice and then find flaws with their model and then improve it in practice. Whereas Tesla was always able to he was so gifted in terms of his conceptualization of the mechanisms that he was creating that he could fully flesh them out and run the simultaneous that would be necessary to determine their validity, even while they were still all in his head. I mean, that is an extreme level of genius. And I think it's something that Dr. Wright shares. I think he does, you know, like if you've ever heard the stories of how he invents, you know, he basically just dictates his inventions into kind of like, you know, the equivalent of one of those old tape machines or something like that. They used to have the little mini tapes or something, you know, like, and so he just hits the record button and he comes up with an invention, and then he sends them off to his associates to basically compute and to you know, formalize, etc. But so what you're getting as someone of his caliber that's defending himself, you know, you're always getting the best that he has to offer. He never gives you less than the best. And you're getting a hyper realized version of a conceptual model that he has created and he has tested, and that he has the full faith in its performance thereof. And I think when you look at a system like Terranode as a demonstration of some of the key values that he has advocated for, and that not only he but Satoshi himself in Satoshi's writings advocated for, you see that you know, it's justice to see that, you know, that Bitcoin could scale all along.
It's a good example. You know, like Terranode, the evolution now that it's running. I mean, Kurt said he was running it, so apparently it's running and operating well. But as the full-on launch of Terranode happens, that's probably a good one of the best examples of proof of work for Dr. Wright, like legacy. Right?
Absolutely.
That was his invention, wasn't it? Terranode?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the signal that's loud as day to anyone that's paying attention, you know, because, you know, I really don't want to, you know, run some of these old arguments about you know, Craig out because I find them to be ridiculous. But, you know, the arguments that he's like, you know, trying to manipulate people or something like this. It's like, you know, okay, so what's the manipulation? Where's he actually where's the scam, you
Who
know?
got harmed? Yeah.
Well, it's the scam is that he's putting his money where his mouth is, and he's putting his head down, and he's doing as I say, you know, or he's doing as
Yeah.
he's showing
Yeah, and
by
well,
leading
I
by
think
action, not
the only person people that have said they've been harmed, and this is always what we say: do not think of what anything we talk about or what Craig talk about or I talk about buying cryptos. Okay, that is not the purpose of this, you know. So, and I think that's where people got harmed is they misunderstood what Dr. Wright was talking about and took it for crypto trading advice, you know. And that's never what I understood him to talk about is crypto trading, you know. And they buy let's say they buy crypto or big BSV and they're trying to trade it and they lost money in trading. It's like that's, you know,
yeah.
it's not that's not at
Yeah.
all the message, you know. So
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe if I can add a thought on that, I've never really considered it this way, but what you just said, you know, brought to my mind a model for understanding money as a you know, an abstract equivalent to the necessity on a biological level of oxygen. Okay, oxygen, you're a health expert, and you know, I'm sure that you could you could probably run circles around me in terms of the importance and the value that oxygen, the presence of oxygen in a system represents. But oxygen is so valuable and so important to the health and benefit of all living systems that if it's freely available, if there's free oxygen there, every system's going to try to grab it, right? My blood cells are going to try to grab it. My neurons are going to try to grab it, right? Because it's so useful. And this is what I think when we look at the value and utility of a blockchain-based digital cash system, this is effectively the oxygen of the world, right? And so as a result, like naturally, just like oxygen is extremely combustible, right? Like, you can use oxygen to launch a rocket into space, like in a controlled setting, you can do like limitless things with oxygen. But also if it's just trickling down the riverside and and frogs are like are benefiting from it, right? Like everything can benefit from this. And so in some ways that's the blessing and the curse of the technology that we're talking about. Because on another level, if we were imagine that there was no money involved on it wasn't digital cash, right? It was just a message system that we could use to send packets of information, like like data streaming. So from the YouTube server to your YouTube browser, and this packet is being sent along the way, almost like in a little bucket, right? And so let's forget for a second that bucket itself is cash, and let's think of it just as a delivery service for that information. In that sense, it would be just so much less controversial because the technology would still be able to do all the same things it can do, right? It can deliver information, it can validate information, it can auditably prove information, it can record information, it can allow content creators to earn from their information, like on a platform like Lament or something like that, right? It can do all of these things. But just like oxygen, it's so valuable that it itself, the bucket itself, is like a mechanism that while it's on the delivery path to send that information from the server to your browser, some other system is going to try to grab it, because it's just like any free oxygen, any other living system would try to co-opt and grab that oxygen and integrate it into its own structure because of how implicit it represents the vital health of the system. So I always say that's why people like the gentleman that we were talking about before, that we're talking about BTC and the value that small blocks represent. I try not to take it too personally, because at the end of the day, it's like, this guy is just trying to wrap his head around something that is very difficult to understand. It is extremely vital, and it represents health in a massive way. It represents the health of his family, his friends, his alma mater, wherever he grew up, his high school, all these things. It's like money has this capacity to have ripple effects, importance to everything else in our life and our society. And so that's the other side of that coin, is that when we get it right, when we get it so that it stops being the vampiric system of basically hegemonic, technocratic, oligarchic institutions that are basically using it as little puppet strings to pull everyone into their little COVID dance or whatever they imagine the next psyop that we should be scared about. And we just realize that we can cut all of those strings, and we can actually use the tools themselves to rebuild an economy with each other. I think that's when you're going to see the renewal of the American exceptionalism and the entrepreneurial spirit, and it'll be global. It won't just be here in the United States.
That's right, Brett. Well, thank you. Let's cut it there, man. I can't thank you enough for your time and effort. Let's do it again sometime. All right. So well said. Good closing.
Thank you so much, Gavin. And thanks to all you watching.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Subscribe, hit the like button, the ones, and reach out to Brett as well at Manifestable, right? At Manifestable on X. All right. All right. We'll see you at the top.